Hi everybody, this is our reading passage for week 3 and I'm going to read it through with you and I'm going to help highlight some important points. So you can take a highlighter or a pencil. If you want to read it yourself you can and go ahead with the comprehension questions, or you can work at a slower pace with me. So this reading passage is talking about when there was contact between the Aboriginal and the Torres Strait Islanders and other people that had explored around Australia. So we're going to read through and learn about who those first European explorers were. So the Dutch were often trading, and this is at Cape Keerweer in 1606. So it's over 100 years before Captain Cook explored, and much longer, about 180 years between later that the first fleet came. So in 1606, the Dutch explorer Willem Janszoon set off from Bantam in the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia. That's what they call it, Bantam. And his boat was called the Duiven, which meaning little dove in Dutch. His mission was to explore New Guinea in search of trade opportunities. So you might like to underline the time, you might like to underline the place, maybe his mission to explore New Guinea, and that was for trade. In particular, he was looking for gold and spices, you could underline that one, both of which were considered very valuable by the Dutch and other Europeans. Unfortunately for Janszoon and his crew, things did not go according to plan. Slowly but surely, unfavourable winds blew the Duiven off course. So it was that sometime in early 1606, the man in the crow's nest shouted, "Lands in sicht," meaning, just come down, meaning land in sight. Soon after, they landed on the west coast of Cape York, Queensland. You can underline that bit. Janszoon called it Cape Keerweer, or Cape Turnback in English. Janszoon and his crew were now the first Europeans to set foot in Australia. So there might be things to underline. At Cape Keerweer, the Dutch were greeted by members of the Wik-Mungkan people. That was the Aboriginal tribe. The Europeans sailed along from overseas and put up a building at Cape Keerweer. A crowd of Wik-Mungkan people saw their boat sail up and went to talk with them. They said they wanted to put up a city. Well, the Wik-Mungkan people said that was all right. They allowed them to sink a well and put up huts. They were at first happy there and worked together. The Europeans gave them tobacco. They carried off the tobacco. They gave them flour. They threw that away. They gave them soap, and they threw away the soap. The Wik-Mungkan people kept to their own bush tucker. So it looks like they had a pretty good start when the Dutch settled and got to know the Aboriginal people. Oral stories, so stories of that time, oral being spoken, of the encounter like this one have been passed down from generation to generation up to the present day. Other stories tell how violence erupted when the Dutch tried to kidnap some of the Wik-Mungkan women and force the men to hunt for them. People on both sides died in the fighting that followed. Running out of food and other supplies, the Dutch then decided to leave Cape Keerweer forever and sail back to the Dutch East Indies, that's Indonesia. So it didn't end so well for the Dutch, and that's why they didn't end up settling and staying in the Cape York. Few Dutch records remain of the encounter. However, we do know they were unimpressed by the land they found and said it was swampy and poor for farming. They also described the Wick-Mungan people as savage and cruel barbarians. It would be more than 80 years before Europeans would again make contact with Aboriginal Australians. Okay, so now we're going to answer the questions, and you can find it just after your reading. So we're looking at the contact between the Aboriginal people and the explorers, and this was quite new for them to be settling or stopping in Australia, because mostly they wanted to trade. So let's look back at our information. And the first question is number 1, when did Willem Janszoon leave the Dutch East Indies or Indonesia? And that was in 1605. Let's start there. Why was he going to explore New Guinea? He was looking for trade, particularly for, it said here, for gold and spices. Spices were very special because they couldn't grow them in Europe very much. So to trade, on the line, and find gold and spices. Try and keep it nice and small and neat. Okay, in the early 1606, where did Willem land and what did he call the place? I'm going to come back to my passage at the top there. And it says that when they saw land, they landed on the west coast of Cape York, Queensland. So they landed, I need to write a full sentence, I've got lots of space, landed on the west coast of Cape York, Queensland. And what did they call the place? It was Cape Career, and you can see on that picture there. Cape Career. Not sure how to say that in Dutch. Why, way, that doesn't quite make sense. Should say what. What is significant that, maybe what is so significant that the Dutch explorers landed at Cape Career? What is significant about, that should say, sorry everybody, about the Dutch sailors landing at Cape Career? And that was, they were the first Europeans to set foot in Australia. So they were the first Europeans to land or set foot, said to set foot on Australian soil. Now there would have been other explorers, but they would have sailed past Australia because it wasn't a place they could trade and get spices and things like that. What were the name of the Indigenous Australians they met? Now make sure you're spelling that correctly. And the Aboriginal people of that area were the Wick-Mungan. Wick-Mungan. Wick, capital letter, Mungan. Number 6, explain the good and bad relationships that the Dutch explorers had with the Indigenous people. I'll come back to my text. Now it said here that the Dutch said they wanted to put up a city. Well, the Wick-Mungan people said that was all right. They allowed them to sink a well and put up huts. they were at first happy there and worked together. The Europeans gave them tobacco, so it sounds pretty happy and good. So my first thing would be the Dutch and Aboriginal people, or the Wicmunken, people work together. I might want to say, and were happy. But then I'm also going to put a sentence about the not so good relationships. And coming down the second page, it said that up here, other stories tell how violence erupted when the Dutch tried to kidnap some of the Wicmunken women and force the men to hunt for them. People on both sides died in the fighting that followed. So that was not so good later. Okay, we could say bad relationships happened when the Dutch kidnapped people and fought with the Wicmunken. I haven't given you much room there. Sorry about that. Let's see if you can fit that in. Now, the last question is to write 2 to 3 sentences explaining what the Dutch explorers thought about the Australian environment and the Indigenous people. So coming back overall, let's see what they thought of the area. It says that few Dutch records remain of the encounter. So we don't know a lot about their encounter or their time in the Cape York. However, we do know that they were unimpressed, which means they're not happy, by the land they found and said it was swampy and poor for farming. They also described the Wicmunken people as savage and cruel barbarians. So it doesn't sound like they're very happy with the place. So firstly, the environment was bad for farming and swampy. And the people they thought were savage and cruel. Now that's their opinion. Who knows what it was like? So it says write 2 to 3 sentences in your own words. I would say the Dutch didn't like the land because it was too swampy for farming. It would have been very different from Europe, from Holland. And remember, up in the north in Cape York, it's very swampy up in that area. Lots of mangroves. Okay, full stop. And then what did they think about the Indigenous people, the Wicmunken people? And it said that they thought they were savages and they were cruel. The Dutch thought the Indigenous people, and use a capital I, Indigenous people were savage and cruel. But it sounds like they didn't do what they wanted them to do anyway. Okay, I hope you've learnt a little bit about those first European settlers. And this week we're going to talk lots about who travelled near or explored Australia and just how many different nationalities came by and tried to settle in Australia but didn't stay. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Dutch people and the Wicmunken. Thank you.